Hi guys, I'm Tori. Welcome back to my channel. Today we're going to be discussing the unsolved disappearance of Madeleine McCann. I think that it's a little bit odd that the first two cases I'm covering on this channel, I've been to the locations of both of the crimes. At totally different periods of time, but still. I've been to Colorado multiple times, I've been to Boulder, and I did the John Benet Ramsey case first, and I've been to Portugal, so it's a little odd. But I haven't been to the city that this happened in, so. Getting right into it, her father, Dr. Jerry McCann, is a consultant cardiologist and a professor of cardiac imaging. He's known for his research in utilizing MRI technology. Her mother is also a doctor, Dr. Kate McCann. There was also a period in time where she was an OBGYN. Eventually, she shifted her focus more to lifestyle medicine and public health education. And one thing that has been said about Kate is that she always wanted to be a mom. When she was in college, all of her friends knew that she wanted to be a mom. And something else that I'd like to mention from the very beginning, Kate and Jerry had to do a lot in order to have Madeleine. She was like their miracle baby. Had to do a lot of IVF treatments. They were not able to get pregnant naturally. So I just want to preface with that. Regardless to what it is that you think happened in this case, I do want to preface with, it was a lot of work to get this baby here in the first place. Madeleine was born May 12th, 2003 in England. I'm not going to attempt to pronounce the name of the city. I can't. The events of her disappearance happened only days before her 4th birthday. She had 2 twin siblings, Sean and I think it's Emily. The spelling is A-M-E-L-I-E. Emile? I don't know how to say her sister's name, but it's okay. They were born in February of 2005. They were 2 when their sister disappeared. I get so upset whenever I talk about the twins or see anything current about the twins because they had this horrible thing happen to them, right? I imagine it completely changed what their childhood looked like versus, if they hadn't lost a sister. Just like random people will be posting and they're like, oh, Sean's doing this with his life, so he must know something about his sister's disappearance. Do you have any memories from when you were 2 years old and sleeping? Leave the twins alone. So they were upper middle class from my understanding. They lived in England and they went on holiday with 7 of their friends and their friends' kids. Those friends would later be known as the Tapas 7, an infamous name that they were given because of the events that would happen on this trip. Friends included Matthew and Rachel Oldfield, David and Fiona Payne, Russell O'Brien, Jane Tanner, and Diane Webster, who was Fiona Payne's mother. I do want to say before I get too far into this, so I have done a lot of research over the last few days about this case. I feel like there are several people who have one narrative and are very much so stuck to it, and I don't feel like that's beneficial to Madeleine. I don't feel like it's beneficial to the family, or I don't feel like it's beneficial to anybody. You could pick anybody as a suspect, decide that you think that they're guilty, and then any facts that present themselves, you can twist them in a way that is going to make that narrative work for you. So if you are going into this with the belief already that the family did it, if you're going into this with the belief already that somebody definitely came in through the window, that is not how cases get solved. Sometimes the media hyperfixates on a suspect and that person is guilty. Nobody has been found guilty. I don't think it's beneficial to be online saying that you're certain that somebody is guilty. I watched this video. It was this really long interview of this guy who has released a book on his theory of how he thinks that there's this whole other timeline where Madeleine had actually passed away on May 3rd, not May 4th. And when I did more research, I found out that the daycare that she had been at, which is getting way far ahead of myself, but the daycare that she had been at on May 4th did sign out for her. So at 5:30 p.m. on May 4th, there's a log at the child daycare that is signed, dated, and recorded that she was there. So this whole theory that she passed away on May 3rd and then they staged everything the following day and had all of their friends in it, you're completely ignoring this piece of evidence that makes that improbable. Like, unless they were able to get the staff in on it at the child care center to log and say that their children were there, all 3 of their children were there when only 2 of them were. It's not beneficial. What my point is to this, it's not beneficial to not have an open mind when looking at a cold case. It's not solved for a reason. So like I was saying, they went on holiday with all of these friends. This holiday, they've been scrutinized for how they took their vacation. A lot of people were very confused by their behavior. Basically, every single day of the trip, except for the very first day when they got there, the kids were at like a daycare that the resort offered. So they would get up, they would have breakfast with their kids, and then they would go drop them off at the daycare at around 9. They would be there until noon. Then they would have lunch with their kids. Then they would go back to the daycare until 5 or 6. They would go pick them up. They would be with them until the twins would go to bed at 7 and Madeleine would go to bed at around 7:30. And then they would go out to dinner with all of their friends. In the most non-judgmental way, why didn't they just leave their kids at home? It seems like it would have been a safer option. It's not like the kids were newborn and they needed to be like on a nursing schedule. So why didn't they just stay at home with like grandparents or something? They wouldn't have had to spend all this money on the daycare. And Kate herself does say that like she was a little bit stressed out leading up to the trip because she was like, I'm not sure if it will be worth it to try to have 3 children all that small in a foreign country, if that will even be fun for them. And then she said that they did have a ton of fun. The kids had a bunch of fun on the beach and everything. But as far as the going to dinner and leaving the apartment unlocked, they've been heavily scrutinized for that, and I'm sure if they could go back and undo it now, they probably would. I will say, and I feel like my take on this is probably a relevant one simply because I'm only 3 years older than Madeleine, so I mean, I didn't grow up in the UK. There is that. But something I will say is we did vacation as a family. Again, why I think it's weird that they weren't doing stuff that was involved with their kids. They were like playing tennis and just hanging out with their friends. My parents would do stuff with us. Like they would take us putt-putt golfing. We would go to the beach together. We would go to the boardwalk. It was a family trip. Nobody else was watching us, especially in a foreign country. But we didn't take trips to a foreign country, so I guess I can't even say that. But my point to this is we would take vacations together as a family. We had our own vacation house. We grew up in Maryland and we had our own vacation house in Ocean City. And even in an area that you could argue my family was more familiar, it's not completely out of their element. This is a house that they own. My mom was still not leaving us unsupervised, with an unlocked door especially, but my mom was not leaving us unsupervised. If we went with other families, which we sometimes did, there was always at least at a minimum, one adult that stayed behind. Normally 2. But if we were like all in bed, then sometimes only one adult would stay behind. And that's not just because of like the fear of abduction, but when you have any amount of children, one or, between like all of like my family and I, there would sometimes be 8 kids in one house. You don't know what could happen. And if there's an emergency and that child doesn't have the ability to reach emergency services, what's going to happen? And it's also interesting to me that they offered services at the resort to check in on the children throughout the night, and the family didn't take advantage of those services. They would rather disrupt their dinner to go have to check on their children every 30 minutes rather than just having somebody there with them the entire time in case there is an emergency. The other reason that they were really scrutinized for leaving their kids in this apartment is that there was 2 doors that gave direct access to the public road. So it's not like they were within a closed resort that nobody could get to the door. Anybody could have gotten to this door. Another thing that I will say, and this actually happened in Portugal. I went there last year and I was 24. I went with my dad and my stepmom. They are moving there. So they have their own condo, which you have to use a key to get into the building, and then you go up an elevator, and then you have to use another key to get into their actual house. There was one night that I decided I wanted to go out exploring. I wanted to take advantage of the nightlife and see what it was about. No offense to the people traveling with me, but everybody with me was 60 plus. So I wanted to go have a young 20-year-old night out. And I was gone for 45 minutes at the most. And I got back, I went to bed. And within 10-15 minutes of me being in my bed, my stepmom poked her head in to check on me and just make sure that I had made it home. I did have a phone. She could have called me. The things that have come up in the case, well, maybe, maybe they didn't have working phones, but well, that wasn't a thing for me. Like, I had WhatsApp. They could have called me. But I was 24. I was more than capable of looking out for myself. And this is a country that they're familiar with. It's where they're moving. My stepmom speaks the language. But even being a 24-year-old, just because it's a little bit out of my element, or a lot out of my element, but a little bit out of their element, just not the most familiar, and I had gone out alone at night. They still made sure that I was sleeping in my bed, and she's my stepmom, and she doesn't have kids, and she knew to do that. And she didn't need to. I had made it back okay. I was in my bed. I was fine. I knew I was going out. I do find carelessness with such young children jarring. So at the restaurant, everybody that was in this group with kids, they were apparently supposed to be going back, taking turns checking on their kids throughout the night. It was supposed to be every 30 minutes, though based on different stories that we've heard from everybody, it wasn't really a consistent 30 minutes. There's actually a night Kate fully admits that she didn't come back for at least 45 minutes. The night before Madeleine goes missing, there is a witness saying that she heard a child crying for over an hour. 75 minutes was her account. Can we prove that was Madeleine? No, but the witness was staying in the apartment, living in the apartment above where the McCanns were staying. It would have either been most likely Madeleine or one of her twin siblings. Regardless, it doesn't matter. One of your kids is crying for you for over an hour. So that actually ties into the day that she disappeared. Earlier that day, she did say, "Why didn't you come when Sean and I were crying?" And then later in an interview, Kate does say that Madeleine kind of just said this to everybody in passing. Original accounts say that Madeleine said that directly to Kate. On the day of the disappearance, her friends and Kate all say that Madeleine and the twins were extremely tired. The people who believe that the McCanns were involved, it's implied that maybe they had been sedating their children, and the sedation from the night before was making them feel tired this day. They also, though, had done an activity that included them being like in little boats out on the water. I feel like that's pretty tiring for a kid. Then at 5:30 p.m. that evening, Kate signs them out of the child care center. It is logged, it is recorded, it is signed. She 100% signed all three of those kids out. This is where the timeline starts to get a little bit messy. So David Payne, one of the friends in the group, had gone to see Jerry, who was playing tennis at the time, and then went back to the apartment to check on Kate and see if she needed any help getting the kids to bed so that she could come out to dinner soon. And this is at around between 6:30 and 7 that he did this, and the claims are different. Kate says that he was there for like maybe 30 seconds. Jerry says he was there for about 30 minutes, and Kate was like bathing the kids and getting them down for bed. 30 seconds and 30 minutes is a big difference in time. Did he just poke his head in, or did he come in and hang out? Like, which was it? It is important to say that for whatever amount of time that he was in the apartment that night, he does say that he saw Madeleine, he saw the twins, they were all normal, in good spirits, nothing out of the ordinary. This would be the last time anybody besides Kate or Jerry physically sees Madeleine, and if you believe that the parents were giving them sedatives, this would have been the window of time that it would have had to happen. Kate herself says that she read Madeleine a story, and then she took her into the bedroom and read her another story in there. Then at 8:30, the McCanns arrive at dinner. I do want to say they were the first ones to arrive, so if you are suspicious of them, they had a very small window here. The resort had a notebook at the front desk that basically said at 8:30 p.m. the McCanns had repeatedly wanted to reserve this table because it was the closest one to their room and they were going and checking on their kids. That could have been an arrow pointing right towards Madeleine and her siblings. If you're somebody who's trying to abduct a child and you see this note and you're like, oh my gosh, there's no parents around watching these kids, there's public access from the road, easy way to get in and out. At 8:40, the rest of their friends arrived. At 9 o'clock, Jane, their group, passes by a man on the street carrying a little girl wearing pale pink pajamas. Now, I'm gonna jump right to the end of this. This was disproven in 2013 to be any person that was tied to the Madeleine case. However, this makes me extremely suspicious of Jane. She doesn't tell anybody that she sees this man carrying a child at the time that Madeleine was potentially abducted until the next day. She doesn't tell police, she doesn't tell her parents, she doesn't tell anybody. I don't understand Jane, because she essentially had information that could have been really important at that moment in the first few minutes after she went missing. It wasn't, but she didn't know that it wasn't. Or she shouldn't have known that it wasn't. So at 9:05 p.m., Jerry does a check on his children and says he found the door to the children's room more ajar than how he had left it, but he notes that Madeleine is sleeping in the position that she was when they left. He doesn't think much of it and fixes the door to how they had left it before. He first claimed that he had gone through the front door, which was locked, And then later he claims that he had gone through this sliding door on the patio, which they had been keeping unlocked, and they were using this throughout the majority of their trip because it was easier to get in and out of. And, you know, if they were having other people check on their kids, then they would be able to access it without keys. So would anybody else, though. After this, he is allegedly talking to Jeremy Wilkins, like a friend that he runs into on the street. And while he's having this conversation, Jane walks by and she sees the men and the men don't see her. And there's a bunch of like conspiracy with this, saying, oh, well, she must have been walking away from her kids, not towards them, or away from the apartment, not towards the apartment, and that's why they didn't see her and why she saw them and blah, blah, blah. Well, I think that Jane is sketchy and I don't necessarily trust her. I don't think it's odd that a woman saw two men in the dark and the two men didn't recognize that she was there. I watched video footage of how narrow the street is. It's not actually that narrow. It's not wide, but like a car can fit down it. It's not like a little tiny walking path. It's not like a sidewalk. And it makes sense to me that a woman would be walking in the dark and see two men and then try to walk as quietly as possible so that those men don't necessarily see her. And then once she saw that it was Jerry, and maybe she recognized Jeremy, she probably was like, oh, okay, and like calmed down and was able to like walk. But I feel like if I were a woman walking alone in the dark and I saw two men, I would not want them to realize I was there either. I don't think it's that odd that they didn't see her, especially if they were engaging in a conversation, because women are constantly looking over their shoulders to make sure that there's not somebody who's a threat to them. Two men standing in the street at night are not afraid of becoming victims the same way that a woman walking alone at night who sees two men, especially in a foreign country, as a woman walking alone, it makes sense to me that she's being very observant of what's going on around her. It's not that weird to me that two men who are engaged in a conversation don't notice her walking by, especially if it was nighttime. So at 9:30 p.m., Matt goes to check on his own children, and while he's doing that, he offers to check on the McCanns as well. He does say originally that he had actually checked on them, and then he changes this to say, well, he just leaned on the door to listen and see that it was quiet in there. He never actually saw Madeleine physically in her bed. And then at 10 p.m., the fateful hour, Kate does a check of the kids' room and discovers that Madeleine is not in her bed or anywhere to be found in the apartment. She checks her room, she checks like the cabinets to see if Madeleine's hiding or anything, and she's frantic and calling for her, and then she runs to where the restaurant is to get everybody's attention, and she starts yelling to them. They've taken Madeleine, they've taken her, she's gone, Madeleine is gone. Now she has been picked apart for leaving her kids. And admittedly, the first time I heard this case, that was the first thing that I thought as well. I was like, why would you leave your kids if you think that somebody just took your other daughter? And I will say, hindsight is 20/20. This is not exactly the same at all, but I have two dogs, and one of them likes to run away. He's done it maybe half a dozen times. And he will sometimes just run right out the front door while I'm there, or he has jumped over the fence out of the backyard and escaped. And my dog is chipped. They both are chipped. But I have never once in a moment of crisis when I am chasing after my dog or I'm looking around frantically in the moment that I've realized that he's gone missing, like that he's escaped, I've never once thought to get online and check his location to see where his chip is. I just frantically start searching for my dog. So it's not the same. It's not like I have two dogs that are running around that have both escaped at the same time and I'm trying to like keep track of all of them. But I asked the question at this point, what did you expect her to do? Because she was far enough away from everybody else that they had to go do these checks, right? She's not actually close enough to the kids that she could see or hear them. So the mistake was being that far away from the kids in the first place. Was she supposed to wake up both of her 2-year-olds, scoop them up, waste that time? Like, she might be thinking that he just immediately, or whoever it was, be thinking that whoever had taken Madeleine had just done it, and that these are precious seconds and she needs to go alert everybody. I can understand criticizing her for leaving the twins. I can understand why that makes her look guilty, because then it begs the question, oh, well, did she not really think that there was any risk to the twins because she knew that there was an abductor? Perhaps. I just feel like when you're in a moment of sheer panic like that, maybe she was just so hyper-focused on, oh my gosh, Madeleine is gone. So like I said before, everyone except for Jane and Diane rushed to the apartment once Kate showed up to the restaurant screaming that Madeleine was gone. Jerry starts messing with the window and discovers then, apparently, that it can be opened from the outside. Now, I looked at the windows, and these are the same kind of windows that my dad has in his condo. I feel like with a good amount of force, it could be opened from the outside, but it would be like a scraping metal, like difficult. And I mean, I haven't been to this actual house. Maybe this one is easier to open. My dad's condo is also on the 7th floor, so the idea of trying to open it from the outside never really occurred to me because, well, it's on the 7th floor. But seeing these kinds of windows, I do feel like it is a possibility. I just feel like it would be difficult. And during an interview, Kate and Jerry are talking about how they didn't think that the window should be able to open from the outside. Jerry's basically like, yeah, it shouldn't be, but it can. Or it shouldn't be able to do that, but it can. Okay, let's not blame the window for you not watching over your child, because if you had been home, or if Kate had been there, this wouldn't have happened. So let's not blame the window. Even if the window were closed, you guys weren't locking the sliding glass door. The window could have been locked the entire time and it wouldn't have made a difference in whether or not somebody was able to have access to your children. The men break off into groups of 2, searching the adjacent apartment blocks while Kate ran through the parking lot screaming Madeleine's name. Jerry asked Matt to go to the resort desk and ask them to call the police, and there was a bit of a delay here because this happens right at 10 o'clock, and the police don't get there until 11:10. Not because of the police. They showed up they were only 5 miles away. They showed up pretty fast, but the reason's unclear. I'm not sure if it's because Matt intentionally waited a little while before he told the resort, or if the resort had their own policy in place about a missing child, and so they waited before involving authorities because that was what they were supposed to do. But once the police get there, and they're called the GNR, they're basically the military police. When they first arrive, they initially thought that Madeleine had just wandered off, and so they definitely treated this as such. And then they alerted the PJs, which are the more like homicide detective type authorities. They were alerted at midnight. They arrived just after 1 a.m., and then at 2 a.m. they arrived with 2 patrol dogs. At 3 a.m., an officer taped off the children's bedroom, but not the rest of the apartment. At 8 a.m., 4 search and rescue dogs showed up. So some of the mistakes made by police here were the numerous people in and out of the apartment and the bedroom before 3 a.m., touching windows, door handles. Hey guys, it's Tori in editing real quick. I just wanted to say, looking at this picture, where are her gloves? I knew that was speculated about the police work in this case, but I didn't know there was literal photo evidence of them not wearing gloves while attempting to collect fingerprints. That's crazy. So the investigation started, and on May 5th, 2007, they had their first official suspect, Robert Murat. He lived locally with his mother, and he was working closely to the case as an interpreter. And basically, just because he was so willing to be involved with the case, so willing to help, that made people raise their eyebrows at him. They were like, why are you so willing to be helpful? Is it because you're trying to keep tabs on this case because you want to make sure they're not getting close to figuring out it was you? No, he said that he just had a daughter in England who was around the same age as Madeleine, and he wanted to be helpful. From the group of friends, Fiona Payne, Russell O'Brien, and Rachel Oldfield all claimed to see him near apartment 5A the night of the disappearance. But him being a suspect, that got lifted in 2008 for lack of evidence, and he was granted £600,000. So the next suspects that we're going to look at are very obviously the parents. Theory here is that the parents had been sedating their children, and one of the reasons that this is very much so believed is because the kids were so tired and the twins did not wake up the entire night. Both kids sleeping through all of this chaos, their mother sobbing, their mother frantically looking throughout the apartment and screaming, their dad forcing the window open from the outside. The twins sleeping through all of that is highly unlikely unless they had been given sedatives. Also, Kate kept checking to make sure that they were still breathing throughout the night. Why would she be doing that unless they had been given sedatives? I do think this is of them accidentally giving Madeleine too much of the sedative and causing her to overdose, or I feel like that's highly unlikely. Because they're both doctors, I feel like the chances of them accidentally overdosing their daughter, I don't feel like that happened. I do feel like it's more likely that she possibly was given the sedative and then she wiped out. In the investigation after this case, 3 months after, they brought dogs in. One of the dogs was purely for blood and one of the dogs was purely for human remains decomposing. and they both hit behind the couch. So I kind of wonder if she was sedated and then she fell and wasn't able to catch herself, and then she hit her head. And then they didn't want to call emergency services in Portugal because then they would have shown up and realized that they were sedating their kids. I will say though, the dogs alerted 13 different times involving the McCanns. In regards to the apartment they were staying in, Kate's clothes, Madeleine's cuddle cat, which they were allowed to keep. And then this was suspicious. After the dogs put a hit on that, Kate washed the cuddle cat and then the dogs still hit it again. They rented a car a few weeks after because they had to stay in Portugal, and that car also had hits on it from both dogs. There were several cars lined up in a garage, and the handler didn't even know which one had belonged to the McCanns or which one they had rented, and the dogs both hit on that same vehicle. A black tennis bag and a fridge are both not accounted for. Jerry threw away the fridge himself, which people thought was a little bit odd. He could have potentially fit a body in it and disposed of it himself, is what people are afraid of there. And then the black tennis bag also going missing if they had hidden her body in the bag and then buried it somewhere. The likelihood of them putting her body in the ocean, I feel like that's highly unlikely. I feel like her body would have washed up. The McCanns were just very much so disliked by the media, disliked by the public. Another reason that authorities were really frustrated with them is very early on, authorities told them not to contact the media. What did they do? They went behind their backs and they immediately contacted the media. Now, I can understand why the McCanns wanted to do this. I can understand why they wanted to reach out to their home country right there, not even in the country that they're from. They're on vacation. This isn't their native language. They want to get help from somebody that is familiar, and they want to get their child's name and face out there so if somebody sees her, that they will contact them. Same kind of concept of having your child's face on a carton of milk. I can understand that. However, the reason that the police didn't want them to do this, though, is because as soon as her name and face are everywhere, that makes her a huge target on her back. That makes the kidnapper have a huge target on their back. So the kidnapper is much more likely to not want to have Madeleine anymore, and to, at the very least, get as much distance between them and Portugal as possible, or worse. They also had stayed in Portugal the entire time that Robert had been a suspect, and they pretty much were in Portugal until 3 days after they became a suspect. So they were declared on Friday and they left the country on Monday. They were legally advised to do this. I think that makes sense. If you're in a foreign country and they're accusing you of murder, it's probably best that you go home so you can at least speak to people that speak your language. You can get proper legal representation. You know what's going on. They did repeatedly go back to Portugal though, and people also really didn't like the McCanns because they didn't like how they acted in the media. They didn't like how they acted during their interviews. They were to come out later and say that they were told not to act with a lot of emotion because whoever had abducted Madeleine might get some sort of satisfaction out of seeing them that upset. And then the argument that they brought media attention to the whole thing to make it crazy, I could understand that, but they've invested so much time and money into it after. But it's also so crazy to me, the idea that she was never, ever, ever found because so much money was offered to bring her forward. It is also worth noting 2 apartments within the same block as their apartment had been burglarized within the last 2 weeks. There was 4 similar abductions to Madeleine's within the previous few years in the same area, but that was not something that the McCanns were aware of. I feel like there is so much understandable criticism for these parents for so many things, and truthfully, like I said in the beginning, I feel like the best situation would have just been for them to leave their kids at home with grandparents or something like that. But I cannot imagine leaving kids that little unsupervised in a foreign country. That sketches me out so bad. With a door unlocked. These kids were so little that they had to have a baby gate set up so that they wouldn't trip and fall down the stairs. Madeleine was that small that they had to have a baby gate up so that she would not trip and fall down the stairs. That to me tells me that she is too small to avoid an accident on her own and should not be left by herself. Especially with 2 other children, because if something happened with one of them, What is she supposed to do? I do want to go back to the window point because this has come up a lot of times. People really crucify them and say, well, why would they go in through the window and come out the window with a child? That doesn't make any sense. Like, that would be really difficult. I think if the abductor scenario is what really happened, that most likely the reason the window was open was it was a plan B. If this was somebody really casing out the place, they had already been in there, if Madeleine was up crying the night before, it's possibly somebody was casing out the place and she heard them come in or anything like that. I think that they probably had the window open in case somebody got back so that they could go out the window and leave. With or without Madeleine at that point, I think that they would have just been worried about getting themselves out. There are more details to this case, but unfortunately, after 14 months of investigating, the Portuguese authorities did go ahead and close this case because of lack of evidence. Madeleine has still not been found. Another thing that people were very judgmental of the parents for is just a few weeks after Madeleine went missing, they hired a British specialist, and what he specialized in was finding human remains. So why were they so sure that Madeleine was not alive to be found? Even to this day, Kate says that she still has hope that they will find Madeleine. It's a horrible case, and at the end of the day, regardless who was responsible, nobody's a winner because this little girl obviously didn't have the childhood that she deserved, that she was entitled to. She didn't get to grow up with her siblings. She didn't get to grow up with her mom and her dad. And the last theory that I wanted to bring up, so there's been, because this case has gotten so much traction and attention, it is, I believe, the most famous missing persons case in the world. There's been a lot of people who think that they have seen Madeleine. And so one of the theories is that she was taken either from a family who could not have a child of their own, or from somebody who stole her to then sell her to a rich family who could not have their own child. This isn't proven, and I mean, Madeleine has that really distinct spot in her eye, so I would love to one day open my phone and see news that Madeleine has been found, that she's been brought home. Until then, thank you for watching my video. Be sure to subscribe.